Today's online lesson is on William Shakespeare's Macbeth, concentrating on Act 3. The first scene of this act takes place at Force, the palace, where Banquo enters, and this first speech of Banquo's, one of the few soliloquies which are spoken by Banquo, represents again to what extent he perceives or understands the influence of the witches on him, and how therefore we can understand the reaction of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth to the equivocating future which the witches have presented to them. Banquo says about Macbeth that "Thou hast it now, King Cawdor Glamis all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playest most foully for it. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, whereby the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope, but hush no more." So here Banquo is talking about the fulfillment of the wishes of Macbeth, and he also points out that they had spoken about, or they had predicted, a far more favorable future for himself. But it's important to remember that Banquo does not easily give in to these temptations, and he has realized that maybe Macbeth has given in to the temptations. Therefore he says that thou playest most foully for it. Therefore we understand that after whatever was talked about in the previous act, in the Potter scene, in the murder scene, whatever had taken place after the murder scene, the courtiers in Duncan's kingdom were gradually realizing that Macbeth's gaining of the position of kingship was usurpation, or a forceful taking over of the position of the king, and no more. It's important that when we consider the theme of regicide, or the murder of the king in this place, in this play, we need to consider the murder of the king on two grounds. One is the murder of the king on legitimate grounds, and secondly the murder of the king on illegitimate grounds. If the king is a tyrant, if the king is a dictator, then the courtiers or the people serving him still have a certain right to rebel against the king, if not murder him. However, most of the courtiers in Duncan's kingdom realize that if Macbeth has murdered Duncan, then he has committed a quote-unquote foul act. It's incorrect, and therefore his own position after the act of regicide that he has committed is purely illegitimate, and therefore his position as a king from the very beginning becomes unstable. Just after this, we witness the entry of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, all of Macbeth recently crowned king, and of course the other lords and attendants. And here they have a short interaction with Banquo, where they talk about what has recently happened and what will happen in the future, where Macbeth says, "We should have desired your good advice, which still hath been both grave and prosperous in this day's council, but we'll take tomorrow. Is it far you ride?" And Banquo talks about going away from the, or riding away from the castle, from the palace. And it's important how Macbeth gradually and secretively extracts information from Banquo to in which direction he will ride, and is Fleance going with him, all of this information, so that he can later plan the murder of Banquo and his son. It's important that just after Macbeth's desires have been fulfilled, Shakespeare presents in him the beginning of insecurity. So the point is that from where comfort comes, discomfort swells. From the time, or from the moment Macbeth's position becomes secure, he himself begins to become insecure. That's one of the important turning points which this scene in this act represents. Another very important point which this scene talks about is the usage of the word parricide or patricide. And Macbeth says, "We hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and in Ireland." We talked about how Malcolm and Donalbain are going to these two different countries, not confessing their cruel parricide, meaning that Macbeth has told the people of Scotland and the courtiers in the kingdom of Scotland that it is Malcolm and Donalbain who had committed the murder of their father. But it's important that Shakespeare is not using the word patricide to only refer to the killing of the father by the biological sons, because here the usage of the word by Macbeth is full of irony, because it's not actually Malcolm and Donalbain who have killed King Duncan. It is Macbeth and Lady Macbeth who have planned and then executed their plan of murdering the king. So it's not biological successors who have killed their father, but it is figures who have been considered who have been considered children of the king, of the kingdom, that who have committed the murder. Therefore, patricide in this play is not only about the murder of the biological father. Patricide in this play is also about the killing of the symbolic father, the person whom you uphold as the father figure. Therefore, the murder of the symbolic father is one of the important points that you all need to discuss under the theme of patricide in this play, in whose context a discussion of this scene and the points in this scene are very important. The final idea or the final point according for which this scene is important is about this important soliloquy of Macbeth, where he is saying, where he is giving a demonstration or representation of the deep-seated insecurities which are rooted in him. It's also Shakespeare's way of making clear that insecurity is something which comes after the fulfillment of an ambition, because just as a human being gets something, he desires even more. Desire is not something which is completely fulfilled in a human being. It's something which goes on increasing. For example, if one of your desires is fulfilled today, tomorrow you'll have another. So it's something which moves in a climactic movement forward until, of course, it falls on the other side, as Shakespeare has told. Therefore, to come back to the soliloquy of Macbeth, where he's saying, to be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. It's important that through his insecurity, what Macbeth searches for is safety, is security. But of course, he's not granted that, and therefore he moves on to the next act of villainy. Our fears in Banquo dig deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that would be fear. So what Macbeth fears in Banquo is not Banquo's enmity, is not Banquo's villainy, but Banquo's friendship and Banquo's neutrality. It's something which make Banquo and Macbeth important moral foil characters. And then he goes on to make a reference that my genius is rebuked, as it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. Mark Antony referring to the Roman, the play on the Roman king Julius Caesar, and of course to this whole drama where Mark Antony, an important general and a very loyal courtier of Caesar's court, who actually took in the process of taking revenge on Caesar's murder, actually demonstrated his own capabilities as a great general and commander. And therefore apparently it would be said that Brutus and Caesar were enemies, and Mark Antony was someone very loyal and close to Caesar. But here Shakespeare is alluding to the greatness of Mark Antony vis-a-vis the greatness of Julius Caesar, and he's saying that till the point Julius Caesar was alive, Mark Antony's position was secondary, and it is only after the murder of Caesar by Brutus that Mark Antony's position and his potentiality came to the fore and could be deemed important. Therefore, it's important that Shakespeare does not allude to references in a very conventional way, but he adapts his ideas to a certain extent according to his own situation, which is to say that it is Macbeth who twists and turns allusions and ideas according to his own desires, and therefore whatever he talks about Banquo here, his fears of Banquo are not really justified. It's something which is constructed by him, and therefore it's something which gives voice to his constant desire to seek insecurity. It's also important at this point to realize that, or to question ourselves, why does at all Macbeth construct these imaginary figures of evil, these imaginary figures of fright? It's because Macbeth is never at rest in his, as far as his conscience goes, because he has repressed that conscience, because as we saw in the previous scene, he wasn't able to say amen. He wasn't able to put at rest his confusions, his questions, and therefore it constantly nags his subconscious. But of course, the way it comes out is in a completely different way. It constructs imaginary fears, it constructs imaginary evils. The final part of this scene is about Macbeth's interaction with the murderers. And it's important to note the way in which he manipulates the minds of serial killers and murderers, which is Shakespeare's way of saying that Macbeth, the brave commander, is gradually turning into Macbeth, the cruel villain, someone who can think very calmly and logically about crime and about criminality. And he's saying to the first murderer, well, now have you considered of my speeches? Know it, that it was he in the times past which held you so under fortune, which you thought had been our innocence held. So he's saying to the murderer that do you remember a time where you were going through a difficult time, and do you know who put you through that difficult time and that difficult position? It was Banquo. So what Macbeth is doing here, he is presenting for the murderer a personal grievance against Banquo. He is creating this personal grievance against Banquo so that when the murderers actually kill Banquo, they do it more out of personal spite, and it's more effective than do it for some professional obligation towards their king. Of course, when a king says something to be done, of course it will be done, and there will be no second thoughts about it. But if you have an additional personal grievance to it, you will do it more cruelly and more definitely. There will be no question of any unsuccess. And therefore we understand Macbeth has really learned how to manipulate the minds of criminality and of criminals, and how to really enact criminality, if not by himself but by someone else. And then this latter speech by Macbeth, I in the catalogue ye go for men as hounds and greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, and he conjures these series of animal images where he's comparing the criminals to these all kinds of animals, but we realize that Macbeth himself is coming so close to these criminals. In fact, he's more effective in thinking about criminality than these criminals. So of course it's Shakespeare's way of indicating that Macbeth is also himself coming very close to becoming bestial. And it's very significant that it is in this scene that the word manhood is used. If Lady Macbeth had taunted her husband about being so full of the milk of human kindness, and there Macbeth had said very proudly that what actually becomes of a man I am doing but to do more, that is to desire to kill the king. If that's being manly, then I am not a man. Here Macbeth has really begun to attain the quote-unquote worst rank of manhood. And this manhood is very importantly related to bestiality in this play. The scene ends with a kind of a clear planning which Macbeth has been able to transmute and sort of relegate to the murderers, and it ends with a short couplet, which is to say that we are prepared really from after this scene that Macbeth's speeches will gradually become shorter and shorter, because soliloquies are really speeches of self-analysis and self-introspection. And Macbeth, from this point onwards, won't really spend so much time thinking about his own actions and pondering on them and introspecting on them, because that will really almost force him to look deep into his consciousness, which is not something which he's ready to do right now. He really wants to forget it, really wants to repress it. When it will come back with a vengeance in Act 5, there he'll be forced to do it, and therefore this couplet is this brilliant way in which he resolves all his doubts, and so quickly. He says, "It is concluded, Banquo, thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight." So if he is to be killed, he shall be killed, and of course if it is in Banquo's luck to reach heaven, then so be it. Otherwise, the next best thing will be available for Banquo. But of course, only everything will be done on that day. Act 3, Scene 2 is a short scene where we witness an interaction between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. And this scene is important because we gradually witness an overturning of the scales in the way in which Macbeth and Lady Macbeth conduct themselves in response to the whole situation. Previously, we felt that it was Lady Macbeth who was the calm, logistical executor of these difficult plans of murder and criminality. But of course, we gradually see that Macbeth is taking over and he's becoming so much more adept at that art of construction than what his wife could ever teach him. And here Lady Macbeth is awaiting the leisure of her husband, waiting to talk to him. And it's important that Macbeth does not share what he has decided to do with Banquo and Pliance, with his wife, which is an indication that he is gradually learning to take decisions by himself, in which he is not involving his wife, he is not sharing, and because he really is becoming more self-reliant in being able to repress his conscience. He therefore needs no help. And therefore this short scene where he says, this short speech where he says, "We have scotched the snake and not killed it. She'll close and be herself, whilst our poor Malice remains in danger of her former tooth." So he's comparing Banquo's position and Fleon's existence to the existence of a poisonous snake, which really have to be killed to the core and its tooth completely broken. Otherwise, it will affect and kill the assaulter. The person will assault very soon. And Duncan is in his grave, and life's fitful fever. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well. Treason has done its worst, nor steel nor poison, malice domestic, foreign levy, nothing can touch him further. So he says that all of these things, treason, malice of various kinds, nothing of a weapon, nothing of a poison can affect him, but whoever has gained his position. Now all of this, all of treason, all of malice, all of assault is really directed towards the person who has taken over Duncan's position. So here Macbeth realizes that whatever he has taken from Duncan is not really the position and the power of kingship, but really the assault which a king faces from various sides. And then Lady Macbeth really tries to calm her husband. Come on, gentle my lord, sleek over your rugged looks and be bright and jovial among your guests tonight. It's important that from this point onwards, we really see Lady Macbeth trying to tend to her husband, trying to take care of her husband, and letting almost trying to build a kind of a confidence in him that you really needn't be insecure about treason, about imaginary malice, and you really needn't be insecure about your position. But Macbeth really does not believe in all of this, and Lady Macbeth advises her husband to be bright and jovial for the banquet scene where his formal coronation before his courtiers will take place. He will be formally introduced as the King of Scotland to his courtiers, and therefore it's important that he's happy on that day because his desires have been achieved. But Macbeth really is not at any peace of mind. But the way in which he responds to his wife is also something that he has begun, just as he has begun practicing the art of construction and the art of superficial and false appearances before other people. He's also become adept at representing or sort of enacting an art of false appearance even before his wife, so close to him. So he says, "So shall I, love, and so I pray be you. Let your remembrance apply to Banquo, present him eminence." So the way he has planned the murder of Banquo in the last scene, and the way he's talking about Lady Macbeth greeting Banquo in this scene for the banquet scene, where he knows so well that Banquo won't come, is really Macbeth's best in his art of false flattery and false appearance. And it's really not something which is coming easily to Macbeth, and therefore there's a short scene where he really reveals his subconscious, whatever is taking place in his subconscious, that, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." It's tearing him apart. Is his mind, the conflicts, the dilemmas in his mind are compared to scorpions. But we must realize that it's just one line. Previously, his acts of revelation of the subconscious, whatever was going on in the subconscious, was represented through the scope of a whole soliloquy. Now it's just one line. So we realize that it's not that Macbeth's conscience is fully repressed, fully killed, but of course it's gradually becoming dead. Gradually. That's important. And in the last speech of Macbeth, he's saying, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed." So he's really removing his wife from him, and this removal from her husband affects Lady Macbeth a lot more than the action of murdering the king and planning out everything regarding the murder, because what Lady Macbeth and Macbeth shared was an extremely close, passionate and intimate relationship, but this growing apart between them is really affecting their relationship very badly, just like Macbeth's fragmentation within himself is affecting him so badly. And therefore this final speech where he's calling upon the powers of darkness, just like Lady Macbeth had done previously, "Come, ceiling nights, carp up the tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand cancel and tear to pieces that great bond which keeps me pale." He's really calling upon the powers of darkness to completely cover up any light of conscience that he may still retain within him. It's important that, the powers of darkness, what is called the Night's black agents, had deliberately called upon to almost kill and annihilate and destroy the quote-unquote good things of day, because but hold these still, things bad begun, make themselves strong by ill. So prithee, go with me. So it's something that needs to be really called upon externally, and this is the second last line, that things bad begun make strong themselves by ill. It means that things which begin badly can only continue if a person continues to commit things evil, you really cannot do a bad thing and then become all repentant about it and then expect that the effect of that thing will continue. So it's really one of the ways in which Macbeth justifies to himself that if I've committed something wrong, to really have a good effect of that wrong thing, I need to commit something which is again bad, again ill. So here still we can find in Macbeth that he's still able to differentiate between what is good and what is bad, what is ill and what is not ill. Still a voice of conscience working, still his moral sense working, still his ethical understanding working, but gradually all of these binaries, that what is fair and what is foul, will become so blurred, so confused. Act 3, scene 3 is a very short scene where the actual murder of Banquo is taking place and where Fleance escapes. A very short scene where it's really important to note how how Banquo is interacting with the murderers and whatever the murderers speak within themselves. There's one speech where the murderers say that he needs not our mistrust, since he delivers our offices and what we have to do to the direction just. And the first murderer says, then stand with us, the west yet glimmers some with some streaks of day, now spurs the later traveller apace to gain the untimely in, and near approaches the subject of our watch. So along with the murderers really waiting to kill Macbeth, to kill Banquo and Fleance, it's important that how they witness nature and that the light of the day is gradually fading and night is approaching. That night which requires the act of murder always requires the darkness of the night to cover it. And Banquo, when the murderers set upon him to kill him, he says, "Oh, treachery, fly, good Fleance, fly, 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 thou mayest revenge." It's important that Banquo understands that he has been murdered not actually by any personal grievance of the murderers, but by the treasonous desires of Macbeth. So the way in which Macbeth dies, Banquo dies, is important to understand the reason for which his ghost will return in the next scene, that is in the banquet scene. Here, of course, Banquo says that it is Fleance who will seek revenge for the murder of his father, but we get an indication that Banquo has been killed because of treachery, and of course treachery needs to be avenged. It's important that in the next scene, what Shakespeare will actually demonstrate is not the literal existence of a ghost, but what the ghost represents, which is the avengement of this treason.